stand back. We're destroying a counterfeit document." The words, sharp and cold as shattered glass, cut through the dull roar of Chicago O'Hare International Airport. The TSA officer, his name tag reading F. Miller, held Dr. Aerys Thorne's diplomatic passport aloft like a conquered flag. Then, with a theatrical rip, he tore it in two, right before her eyes. He let the severed halves of her identity flutter into a steel bin, struck a match from a small paper book, and tossed it in. Flames erupted, a hungry orange maw consuming her face, her name, her authority. An audience of strangers, a river of travelers flowing through Terminal 5, slowed and stared, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and fearful relief that it wasn't them. "Arms out, legs spread." Miller's voice was a drill sergeant's bark, each syllable a fresh assault. He was building a stage, and she was his unwilling star. Have you ever been made to feel like a criminal when you've done nothing wrong? What goes through your mind when the world turns on you in an instant? Drop a comment below, because we need to talk about this. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button for Beat Stories. We don't just tell stories, we confront the moments that define us. Miller's hands began the pat-down, but it wasn't professional. It was a violation. His palms lingered on her back, his fingers probed the seams of her jacket with an invasive deliberation that had nothing to do with security and everything to do with power. His colleagues watched, their faces etched with smirks of shared contempt. "Fake is fake," Miller muttered, his breath hot and sour near her ear. "Doesn't matter if you're wearing a $10,000 suit." Aerys didn't flinch. Her mind became a high-resolution camera, cataloging every detail with chilling precision. Officer F. Miller, badge number 7834. His partner, Officer Davis, badge number 9122. The exact time on the terminal clock, 3:47 p.m. The number of witnesses within a 20-foot radius. Her expression remained a mask carved from granite, betraying none of the cold fury coiling in her gut. This public degradation was a performance, and she would not give him the reaction he craved. "You people always try this," Miller continued, his voice rising, playing to the crowd. "Wave some fancy degree around, thinking it makes you better than us." The last pieces of her passport curled into black ash, the smoke a bitter incense rising toward the impassive eye of a security camera. Just then, her phone, lying in a plastic gray bin, buzzed with an incoming text. A message from another world, a world where she was respected, needed. Landed. Meeting with the NSC is in 90 minutes. Only moments before, Dr. Aerys Thorne had been just another weary traveler in the international arrivals line. The faint wrinkles on her custom-tailored charcoal suit were the only evidence of the 17-hour flight from Freetown, Sierra Leone. A profound exhaustion pulled at the marrow of her bones, yet her posture was impeccable, a straight spine, a squared chin. It was a physical habit born from a lifetime of navigating spaces where she was often the only woman, and almost always the only black woman in the room. Spaces where her very presence was an unspoken question she was forced to answer again and again. She had just spent 5 grueling days on the ground, leading a WHO rapid response team to contain a new, terrifyingly virulent strain of Marburg virus. Her mind, even now, was a whirlwind of viral genomics and containment protocols. On her tablet, she scrolled through the final draft of her briefing notes for the National Security Council, her fingers tracing the data points that represented thousands of lives saved, a potential global pandemic averted. Her work was a shield for millions, yet to the casual observer, she was just another face in the crowd, her significance entirely invisible. From his perch at the primary checkpoint, TSA officer Frank Miller saw her. He saw the expensive suit, the confident posture, the elegant leather briefcase. He saw a target. He nudged his partner, a younger, more impressionable officer named Davis. "Check it out," Miller murmured, a slight sneer twisting his lips. "Got another one playing diplomat. $10 says her paperwork's a mess." Miller had a well-documented history, a file thick with passenger complaints that always seemed to evaporate before reaching the level of formal disciplinary action. Just last month, a supervisor had a quiet word with him about the statistically impossible number of random secondary screenings he performed on travelers of color. The conversation had concluded not with a warning, but with a conspiratorial wink. It was an unspoken endorsement. As Aerys approached the front of the line, Miller's entire demeanor shifted. The slack-jawed boredom of a man at the end of his shift vanished, replaced by a rigid mask of authority. "Ma'am, step to the side for routine verification," Miller announced, his voice booming with unnecessary volume. He then waved through a family of 4, all white, with a cursory glance at their passports, not even breaking stride. He turned his attention back to Aerys. "Take that off, please." He gestured vaguely toward her head, where a simple, elegant silk scarf held her hair in place. There was no security protocol that required its removal. It was a test. A small, demeaning hoop to see if she would jump. With a practiced, weary dignity, Aerys complied, unwrapping the scarf as she felt the prickle of dozens of eyes on her. This was not a new experience. The airport was different. The officer's face was different. But the moment, this arbitrary exertion of power, this unwarranted scrutiny, was achingly familiar. She placed her briefcase, her coat, and her phone into the gray plastic bin, her mind a million miles away, already in the sterile DC briefing room, outlining viral transmission vectors to the nation's top security advisors. Miller leaned over to Davis, his voice a stage whisper meant to be overheard. "Always some excuse. I'm a doctor. I'm a diplomat. Watch this." He picked up Aerys's passport, holding it between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a soiled piece of trash. His eyes darted between the photo on the ID page and her face, his brows furrowed in an exaggerated performance of suspicion. The photo was 3 years old. In it, her hair was chemically straightened, a concession to a corporate world that often equated natural black hair with unprofessionalism. Today, she wore it in its natural, tightly coiled state. "Purpose of your visit to Sierra Leone?" he demanded, ignoring the crisp official entry and exit stamps that clearly documented her mission. "I was leading a World Health Organization emergency response conference in Freetown," Aerys replied, her voice a calm, even sea in his manufactured storm. "I'm the lead infectious disease specialist at Northwestern's Feinberg School of Medicine." Miller let out a short, sharp snort of derision. "This photo doesn't look like you." He tapped the glossy image with a grimy fingernail. "The passport is valid, officer. I've changed my hairstyle." Her tone was clipped, professional, offering no emotional purchase. As if on cue, Officer Davis pulled on a pair of blue latex gloves with a loud, intimidating snap. He began to rummage through her carry-on, his movements clumsy and disrespectful. He upended a folder of carefully organized medical research, sending pages of complex genomic sequencing data scattering across the sterile inspection table. When Aerys instinctively reached out to gather her falling work, Miller barked, "Stay still! Do not touch anything!" His right hand drifted down, resting casually on the butt of his sidearm, a clear and unambiguous threat. A few feet away, a young woman in a university sweatshirt watched the scene unfold, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and outrage. She looked around, searching for an ally, for anyone else who saw what she was seeing. Finding no one meeting her gaze, she dropped her head and stared intently at her phone, her thumb hovering over the camera icon. "I would like to speak with a supervisor, please," Aerys said. Her voice did not waver. It was not a plea. It was a demand. "Supervisor's not available," Miller shot back instantly, the lie smooth from years of practice. "Questioning my authority, Dr. Thorne, is only going to make things worse for you." He deliberately butchered her name, another small cut in a death by 1,000 cuts. "It's Thorne," she corrected him coolly, "and I am not questioning your authority. I am requesting that you follow appropriate procedure." "This is the procedure for suspicious documents," Miller said, his voice climbing in volume and pitch. "We decide what's appropriate here, not you." Davis continued his desecration of her belongings, picking up her state-of-the-art diagnostic tools, handling delicate medical instruments with a careless disregard that made Aerys's stomach clench. He held up her official WHO credentials, a badge that granted her access to some of the most restricted biolabs in the world. "These could be fake," Miller declared, holding the badge up to the light as if he possessed some arcane knowledge of forgery detection. "We see this all the time. Sophisticated stuff. Above them, a security camera, its red light blinking rhythmically, silently swiveled to frame the escalating confrontation. A call crackled over Miller's radio, a dispatcher's voice, but he ignored it, his focus entirely on his prey. "Your passport shows inconsistent travel patterns," he announced, inventing a new violation on the spot. "Multiple entries into high-risk zones. That's a major red flag for document fraud." He pointed to a designated spot on the floor, a stark white square painted directly under the harshest of the overhead fluorescent lights. "Take off your shoes." Aerys's eyes flickered to the adjacent lane, where a white businessman was waved through, his expensive loafers still firmly on his feet. She held Miller's gaze as she slipped off her practical, low heels. Her legal training, a Juris Doctor earned years before her medical degree, kicked in. The mind's camera was rolling. Document everything. Note the inconsistencies. Build the case. "We're going to need a full search," Miller declared to the terminal at large. He motioned for Davis, who approached with a fresh pair of gloves. Instead of directing her to a private screening room, which was standard protocol for such an invasive inspection, Miller positioned her in the center of the concourse. He was turning her humiliation into a public service announcement. "This is what happens when you challenge me." Travelers slowed, their curiosity piqued. Some stared openly, their phones held low, recording the spectacle of a poised, professional black woman being systematically dismantled by a man in a uniform. Davis unceremoniously dumped the entire contents of her suitcase onto the steel table. Her medical kits, her research binders, her spare clothing, her personal toiletries, all of it became a public exhibition. "Rimowa luggage, Prada shoes," Miller commented, lifting each item with the tip of a ballpoint pen as if it were evidence in a crime. "Expensive taste for a doctor. Where do you get the money for all this?" The insinuation was as ugly and suffocating as the smoke from her burning passport. He held up the security pass for her upcoming White House visit, dangling it between two fingers. "And this? A visitor's pass to the White House? Come on now. You really expect me to believe this?" "That is an authorized security credential for a briefing with the National Security Council," Aerys stated, her voice a low, steady anchor in the swirling chaos. The heat was rising in her chest, a furnace of rage she refused to let show. "Sure it is," Miller smirked. Nearby, an older black woman in a janitorial uniform paused her cleaning cart. Her eyes, full of a deep, sorrowful wisdom, met Aerys's. It was a look of shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement of a story that had been playing out in this country for centuries. The woman, slow and deliberate, reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and angled it just so, the lens peeking out from behind a stack of clean rags on her cart. Miller caught the movement out of the corner of his eye. His head snapped around. "Hey, no recording in a federal security area." He strode toward the employee, his hand outstretched. "Give me that phone, now." Just as the confrontation was about to boil over, a new figure arrived. Airport Police Officer Ramirez, drawn by the raised voices and the bottleneck of onlookers, approached the scene. His face was a neutral mask, his eyes taking in every detail: the scattered high-end luggage, the burning bin, the composed, statuesque woman at the center of it all, and Miller, puffed up with self-importance. Ramirez's eyes narrowed, but he didn't intervene directly. Instead, he positioned himself a dozen feet away, a silent, calculating observer. Aerys's phone, still in the gray bin, began to ring. The screen lit up with the caller ID. AG's office. Miller, seeing it, snatched the phone from the bin before she could react. He was now holding a direct line to the most powerful lawyer in the country, and he had no idea. Aerys's mind was now a split screen. On one side, she maintained her outward calm, the measured breathing, the steady gaze, the professional posture. On the other side, her inner lawyer was running a continuous forensic analysis. Officer ID, Miller, F, badge Jatavzetaman 834. Officer ID, Davis, T, badge number 9122. Time, 4:02 p.m. Witnesses, approximately 22 passengers, 2 airline staff, 1 airport police officer. Violations, unlawful search, destruction of federal property, passport, discriminatory application of screening protocols, illegal seizure of property, phone. This moment was being filed away in a vast mental evidence locker, placed alongside a lifetime of similar depositions. The Northwestern dean who mistook her for a new administrative assistant, despite the MD. JD on her faculty ID. The hospital board member who asked if she was in the right room when she entered the executive conference for a presentation she was leading. The Chicago real estate agent who swore a luxury condo was available on the phone, only to claim it had been suddenly sold when she and her husband, Marcus, arrived for the viewing. And in that cold, fluorescent-lit moment, she made a silent, unbreakable vow. This would be the last time a man like Frank Miller would wield his petty power with impunity. Without permission, Miller answered her ringing phone, holding it to his ear like a war trophy. "TSA security checkpoint," he barked into the receiver. His smug expression began to melt as he listened to the voice on the other end, a voice that was deep, calm, and radiated an authority that could not be faked. "Dr. Thorne is currently being processed for security violations," Miller stammered, a defensive whine creeping into his tone. "We have protocols that must be—" The voice on the other end cut him off, the words sharp and inaudible to anyone else. But their effect was immediate. Miller's neck flushed a deep, blotchy red. "She'll be available when our investigation is complete," he said, trying to regain his footing, and then abruptly hung up. His eyes, now wide with a flicker of uncertainty, darted toward Officer Ramirez, then to his partner Davis, who had suddenly started to look very nervous. Miller stalked back to Aerys, his voice now a low, menacing hiss. "Your fancy friends in D.C. can't help you here. This is my house, federal jurisdiction." While Miller was distracted, arguing with a supervisor over his radio, Officer Ramirez discreetly moved closer to Aerys. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his body shielding the exchange from Miller. "Do you require any medical assistance?" It was a pretext, a way of creating a private moment in a very public space. Aerys met his gaze. "No," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "But I need you to call this number." She recited a 10-digit number from memory, a number she knew as well as her own name. "Tell them exactly what you have witnessed here, every detail." Ramirez's expression remained unchanged, but a small, almost imperceptible nod was all the confirmation she needed. He melted back into the crowd. Finding a secluded spot near a bank of administrative offices, Officer Ramirez made the call. It connected on the first ring. "This is Attorney General Thorne," answered a voice that commanded obedience without ever having to raise its volume. "Sir, this is Airport Police Officer Miguel Ramirez at Chicago O'Hare," he said, his voice low and steady, his eyes scanning the concourse. "I'm calling about your wife, Dr. Aerys Thorne." There was a pause on the other end, a silence so cold and dense it felt like it could freeze the air. "Officer Ramirez," the Attorney General's voice returned, now stripped of all warmth, as hard and sharp as diamond. "I want every detail, I want every name. Start from the very beginning." As Ramirez delivered a concise, fact-based account from his vantage point, the gears of power began to turn hundreds of miles away in Washington, D.C. The Attorney General of the United States, Marcus Thorne, ended the call and turned to his Chief of Staff. "Cancel everything for the rest of the day," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "and get me the head of Homeland Security for the entire Midwest region on the line, now." Back at the checkpoint, Miller could feel something shifting, the ground eroding beneath his feet. This woman's composure was unnatural. It unnerved him. Most people, when put under this kind of pressure, broke. They cried, they yelled, they pleaded. They gave him an excuse to escalate, to assert his dominance. Dr. Thorne's glacial calm felt like an indictment, a quiet judgment of his inadequacy. He had to regain control. "Your passport shows clear signs of tampering," he declared loudly, doubling down on his lie. "We're going to have to move you to extended verification." He gestured for Davis to escort Aerys to a glass-walled holding room off to the side. A fishbowl of shame, designed to make an example of detained travelers. Its supposed transparency, meant to ensure accountability, was instead a tool for public humiliation. "Standard procedure for suspicious travelers," Miller explained to the onlooking passengers, many of whom were now openly filming the incident. Davis's movements were now hesitant, his earlier bravado gone. He had seen Miller pull this routine before, usually on people who looked like Dr. Thorne. But something about this woman, her unyielding dignity, felt different. It felt dangerous. Still, the instinct for self-preservation, the fear of crossing a senior officer, won out over his flickering conscience. He gestured for Aerys to enter the room. As the glass door closed, sealing her in, Miller retrieved a clipboard. He began filling out a form, his pen scratching loudly in the suddenly quiet terminal. "This is the official documentation for passport destruction," he announced, performing for his audience. "A procedural necessity when fraudulent travel documents are positively identified." At that moment, the airport's on-duty supervisor, a harried-looking man named Martinez, finally arrived, drawn by the crowd and the crackle of concerned chatter on his walkie-talkie. "Miller, what the hell is going on here?" Martinez demanded, his tired eyes taking in the chaotic scene. Miller snapped into his well-rehearsed official persona. "Subject presented suspicious documentation, sir. Exhibited classic evasive behaviors when questioned. Attempted to use supposed academic credentials to intimidate my officers. I've assessed her as a potential flight risk." Martinez glanced at Aerys, sealed in her glass cage, the picture of calm defiance. He looked at the chaos on the inspection table. He looked at his watch. 5 hours left on his shift. 3 major incidents already requiring reams of paperwork, and a critical staffing shortage in Terminal C. The path of least resistance was a siren song. "Fine," Martinez sighed, not even making eye contact with Aerys. "Proceed with the verification protocols. Just keep it quiet." As Martinez beat a hasty retreat, Gloria Hines, the veteran janitorial employee who had tried to film the incident, slipped away into a staff break room. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled up the video she had managed to capture. She sent it to 2 contacts. The first was a reporter at the Chicago Tribune who owed her a favor. The second was an email address she'd kept taped to the inside of her locker for 15 years, an address for the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, labeled Urgent, Violation in Progress. Inside the glass room, Aerys watched Miller preen. "May I have a glass of water, please?" she asked, her voice clear through the partition. "And I need to use the restroom." A smirk flickered across Miller's face. He was enjoying this. Security protocols restrict all movement during an active investigation. Once we've completed our full assessment of the threat you pose, we can consider basic accommodations. Her continued composure was like sandpaper on his last nerve. The supervisor's phone rang. It was the airport's director of operations. "Martinez," the director's panicked voice squawked through the phone. "There's something you need to know about the woman you have in holding room 3. But it was too late. Miller, in his grand finale, performed the ritual he had been building towards. He wanted every single person watching to see his power, to understand the severe consequences of questioning his authority. He held up the lighter. "When we identify fraudulent documents," he announced, his voice echoing in the terminal, "they must be destroyed immediately. That is federal security protocol." He dropped the still-burning matchbook into the steel bin on top of the ruined passport. The flames reignited, the acrid smoke of burning paper and cheap coffee filling the air. Through the glass wall, his eyes locked with Aerys's as the last vestiges of her official identity turned to ash. "Standard procedure," he declared again, to the silent, watching crowd. "How would you react in this situation? Would you have been one of the people filming, or would you have been too scared to get involved? The choices we make in these moments matter. If you believe they do, make the choice to like this video and share it with someone who needs to see what courage under fire looks like. Let's get this story to as many people as possible." From behind the glass, Aerys spoke, her voice calm and clear. "I'd like your full name and badge number for my records, please." The simple request seemed to short-circuit Miller's brain. He was the one who collected information, who demanded identification. This role reversal was an act of insubordination. "Interfering with a federal security procedure is grounds for immediate detainment," he snapped, his knuckles white where he gripped his clipboard. "You're already facing serious federal charges. I wouldn't add to the list." Officer Ramirez returned to the main concourse, taking up a new position near the exit, his posture radiating a quiet readiness. His focus was now entirely on the glass room. Miller saw him, and a seed of paranoia began to sprout. The dynamics were shifting in a way he couldn't comprehend. He was losing control of his own story. "Need additional units at Checkpoint 5, he muttered into his radio. "Potential security situation developing." Aerys watched as Davis began bagging her belongings, her medical research, her diplomatic credentials, her NSC presentation, into evidence bags, labeling each with a cheap handwritten tag. "This constitutes the illegal seizure of my personal and professional property," she stated, her voice loud enough to carry to the witnesses nearby. "For the record, I do not consent to this search or to this seizure." Miller laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Consent isn't a factor in matters of national security, ma'am." At that exact moment, through the massive terminal windows, a motorcade of black SUVs with flashing lights and government plates screeched to a halt at the departures curb, ignoring all traffic laws. Doors flew open. The airport director, a man named Simmons, came sprinting toward the security area, his polished dress shoes slipping on the polished terrazzo floors. He was flanked by 2 panicked-looking senior TSA officials. Simmons' face wore the terrified expression of a man who had just been told there was a live bomb in his office, and he was sitting on it. Miller saw the approaching phalanx of authority and misread the entire situation. He thought they were his reinforcements, the cavalry arriving to commend him for his vigilance. He puffed out his chest and straightened his tie. "Sir, "We've detained a traveler attempting to enter the country with fraudulent documentation," Miller began, stepping forward to greet Simmons. "I've already initiated Level 3 containment protocols and—" Simmons blew past him as if he were a ghost, not even acknowledging his existence. The director's eyes were locked on the glass holding room, on the woman standing serenely inside. Officer Davis, far more perceptive than his partner, understood immediately. The atmosphere had changed. The air was thick with impending doom. He began frantically but carefully gathering Aerys's scattered belongings, trying to repack them neatly in her suitcase. A desperate, futile attempt to distance himself from the catastrophe he saw coming. "You'll need to sign these transfer forms," Miller said to Aerys through the glass, utterly oblivious to the storm about to break over his head. "We're transferring you to a federal detention facility for extensive questioning. Homeland Security has an entire division for this. They'll be very interested to know where you got such sophisticated forgeries." The crowd of travelers was growing restless. A man in an expensive business suit finally spoke up. "This has gone on long enough. This is wrong. She asked for a supervisor half an hour ago." A murmur of agreement rippled through the onlookers. Dozens of phones were now openly recording. A senior TSA supervisor, Wallace, finally arrived, his face pale with alarm. He took in the scene: the smoldering bin, the woman in the glass box, the approaching airport director, and the motorcade visible through the window. "Officer Miller, stand down," Wallace ordered, his voice thin and strained. "I am in the middle of processing a national security threat," Miller retorted, not even looking up from his clipboard. "My investigation is ongoing." Wallace glanced at his phone. 12 missed calls, 7 text messages, all marked urgent. The most recent one read, "AG inbound, your location, damage control now." Aerys saw the power structure collapsing around her. Still maintaining that unshakable composure, she addressed Supervisor Wallace directly. "Sir," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "May I please have my phone? I need to inform my husband that I will be late. He is expecting me for a meeting at the White House in less than an hour." Before Wallace could answer, the main terminal doors burst open with such force that they banged against their stoppers. Attorney General Marcus Thorne strode into the terminal. He wasn't a man. He was a weather system. At 6'4", his presence alone seemed to suck the air out of the room. His tailored suit was a shield of dark gray armor, and his face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. He was flanked by 4 senior Homeland Security officials and 3 FBI agents, moving in a tight diamond formation. Their synchronized, silent efficiency spoke of years of training and absolute loyalty. Miller was still fussing with his paperwork, head down, until Supervisor Wallace grabbed his arm and whispered frantically in his ear. "That's Marcus Thorne, the Attorney General of the United States, and he's coming this way." The color drained from Frank Miller's face. It was a rapid, horrifying cascade, like watching a building demolish itself in slow motion. He looked from Wallace's terrified face to the serene woman in the glass box, then to the approaching federal storm. His Adam's apple bobbed violently as he swallowed. Officer Davis, seeing his chance, took 3 large steps away from the holding room, his hands held up slightly in a universal gesture of surrender. "I was just following orders." His posture screamed. Marcus reached the security checkpoint. He didn't need to show a badge. His face was his credential. He walked directly to the glass room where Aerys stood. For a split second, their eyes met. A universe of communication passed between them in that silent glance. Love, anger, reassurance. He placed his palm flat against the glass, a brief, grounding touch. Then he turned, and the husband was gone, replaced by the full, terrifying power of the Attorney General. "Identify yourselves," he commanded. The words were not shouted. but they landed with the force of a physical blow. "Every officer at this checkpoint, I want your names and badge numbers. Now." He held up his own credentials. "I am Attorney General Marcus Thorne. My office has received credible reports of ongoing, severe civil rights violations being committed at this location." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Open this door." Supervisor Wallace, his hands trembling so badly he could barely hold his keycard, fumbled with the electronic lock. Miller, in a last pathetic gasp of defiance, stepped forward. "Sir, with all due respect, we were following established security protocols for suspicious—" Marcus cut him off with a single raised finger. "Officer Miller, I wrote a significant portion of those protocols myself when I chaired the Senate Intelligence Committee. I am intimately familiar with what they permit and what they absolutely forbid." From an inner pocket, Marcus produced a slim leather folio. He opened it to reveal a pristine backup copy of Aerys's diplomatic passport. He held it up next to Miller's sloppily filled-out incident report. He watched the last bit of color drain from the officer's face. "My wife," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level, "never travels without duplicate documentation. It's a precaution one learns after decades of humanitarian work in unstable regions." The revelation sent a shockwave through the crowd. A wave of whispers erupted as the full picture snapped into focus for everyone watching. The glass door slid open, and Aerys stepped out, her dignity as immaculate as the moment she had arrived. She stood beside her husband, a united, formidable front. "I am Dr. Aerys Thorne," she said, her voice resonating through the now silent terminal, a formal statement for the record. "I am a senior advisor to the National Security Council on Global Health Security. I was returning from a WHO mission in Sierra Leone, where my team and I successfully contained a Level 4 viral outbreak." She then began to list the violations against her, her voice as precise and dispassionate as if she were delivering a medical diagnosis. "Officer Miller detained me without probable cause. He destroyed my federal passport without authorization. He denied me access to basic facilities and communication. He conducted an illegal public search of my person and property, all while making repeated discriminatory and unprofessional remarks." Suddenly, they were no longer alone. Witnesses surged forward. Gloria Hines, the janitor, her phone held out as evidence. The young woman from the line. The businessman who had spoken up. FBI agents moved through the crowd with quiet efficiency, collecting their statements, taking their phones to download the video evidence. Officer Ramirez approached Marcus directly, his face set and professional. "Mr. Attorney General, sir, I witnessed the entirety of the incident. Officer Miller's actions were in direct violation of at least a dozen TSA and federal statutes. I attempted to intervene through proper channels and was ignored." Airport Director Simmons hovered at the edge of the scene, his face the color of ash. The mental calculations of the impending lawsuits, personal, municipal, and federal, were visibly flashing behind his eyes. The Attorney General turned his cold gaze on the airport executives. "This is not about my wife," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "This is about a systemic failure. I want every passenger complaint and every incident report filed from this checkpoint for the past 5 years. They will be on my desk by 6 a.m. tomorrow." Less than an hour later, Director Simmons stood before a hastily assembled wall of news cameras, the bright lights making the beads of sweat on his forehead glisten. Chicago O'Hare International Airport extends its most sincere and profound apologies to Dr. Aerys Thorne for the inexcusable and appalling treatment she experienced today, he read, his voice shaking from a prepared statement. The actions of certain individuals were a gross violation of our protocols, our values, and the law. Behind the scenes, the airport was in full-blown crisis mode. Legal teams huddled in emergency sessions. Homeland Security officials had commandeered a conference room, turning it into a federal command center. Miller and Davis were summarily suspended, their badges and credentials confiscated. They were escorted from the premises by the same airport police they once commanded. In the terminal's administrative suite, Marcus Thorne stood, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled up. "What happened to my wife today was not an anomaly," he told the assembled airport board members, his voice the calm, measured tone of a man who had won 8 cases before the Supreme Court. "It was the predictable result of a system that lacks oversight, accountability, and basic human decency." He pressed a button on the conference room phone, activating the speaker. "Mr. President, I have the O'Hare leadership here. I believe you had a few words for them." The unmistakable voice of the President of the United States filled the room. The board members, to a man, sat up ramrod straight. Outside, news vans clogged the arteries of the airport. The story had gone viral. O'Hare outrage and short justice for Dr. Thorne were trending globally. The videos, shot from a dozen different angles, were everywhere. Miller burning the passport, Miller's smirk, Aerys's unwavering composure. Later that evening, Dr. Aerys Thorne, composed and articulate, addressed a small group of reporters. "My concern is not for what happened to me," she explained, her voice steady. "I have resources. I have a voice. My husband is the Attorney General. The real question is, what about the thousands of people who are subjected to this kind of treatment every single day who don't have those advantages? This is for them." Her words shifted the narrative. This was no longer just an assault on a prominent individual. It was an indictment of a broken system. In the weeks that followed, the floodgates opened. Data analysts from the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division descended on O'Hare, and their findings were damning. They uncovered a clear, undeniable pattern. Officer Frank Miller had selected minority travelers for secondary screening at a rate that defied all statistical probability. Black women, in particular, were targeted at a rate nearly 20 times that of white men. The internal TSA complaints had been systematically buried, labeled as subjective or unsubstantiated. The investigation revealed a toxic, informal culture of bias, encouraged by supervisors who looked the other way. Officer Davis, facing serious federal charges, cooperated fully. In a videotaped deposition, he laid it all bare. "Miller called it using his gut," Davis admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "But his gut was just his prejudice. We were informally taught to look for indicators that weren't in any official manual. It was code. Code for race, for religion, for national origin. Gloria Hines, the janitor, became an unlikely national hero. Her meticulously kept records, 3 decades of documenting similar incidents she had witnessed, became a cornerstone of the federal investigation. Her notebooks provided a roadmap of systemic abuse, pinpointing problem checkpoints and negligent supervisors. Officer Ramirez received a departmental commendation from Homeland Security for his integrity and courage. His testimony about the failures of the internal reporting system led to its complete overhaul. The TSA director was forced to resign. Her replacement immediately announced a nationwide, top-to-bottom review of all training and complaint procedures. The video of Frank Miller burning the passport had become the defining image of governmental overreach, and the public demanded action. A massive class action lawsuit was formed, with Gloria Hines's records and the newly released security footage forming the basis of their case. The Congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C. was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Frank Miller sat stiffly at the witness table, his cheap suit doing little to hide the sweat staining his collar. "Officer Miller," the Congresswoman began, her voice like ice. "Could you please explain to this committee the official TSA protocol for handling a suspected fraudulent passport?" Miller leaned into the microphone. "When documentation raises suspicion, we are trained to follow escalation protocols to verify its authenticity. And do those protocols, at any point, instruct you to destroy a United States diplomatic passport in a metal trash bin using coffee and a personal lighter? She fired back. The room was silent. On the large screens behind her, the relevant pages of the official TSA handbook were displayed, the text highlighted in yellow. "Could you please point to the section that authorizes such an action?" Miller stammered. It's a field expedient procedure." "It is not," the Congresswoman interrupted. "In fact, the handbook explicitly prohibits the destruction of any government-issued ID. It instructs officers to confiscate the document and submit it through official evidence channels. Is that not correct, Officer Miller?" His attorney whispered frantically in his ear. "Perhaps," Miller finally mumbled. "My training was not consistent with the current written standards." When Dr. Aerys Thorne testified, you could hear a pin drop. She did not speak of her own anger or humiliation. Instead, with the clinical precision of a world-renowned scientist, she detailed the profound physiological impact of discriminatory treatment. "The trauma is not in the single moment," she explained, her voice resonating with authority. "It is cumulative. It aggregates over a lifetime, leading to measurable negative health outcomes. It erodes trust in the very institutions designed to protect us. It is a sickness in the body of our nation." She was not a victim seeking pity. She was an expert witness diagnosing a disease. The committee's findings were swift and brutal. Frank Miller was indicted on multiple federal charges, including destruction of government property and felony civil rights violations. His supervisors were fired. The entire management structure at O'Hare was dismantled and rebuilt. 6 months later, the Secretary of Transportation stood at a podium to announce the nationwide implementation of the Traveler's Dignity Act. Every TSA officer in the country would now be required to wear a body camera. A new, anonymous, multilingual reporting system was established, monitored by an independent civilian oversight board. Gloria Hines was appointed as the first head of that board's compliance office for the Midwest region. Miguel Ramirez was promoted to head the TSA's National Training Academy, where he developed a new curriculum centered on de-escalation and constitutional rights. The shield or report mandate became law. Officers were now legally required to either intervene to stop misconduct or to formally report it. Failure to do either was grounds for immediate termination. 1 year to the day after the incident, Dr. Aerys Thorne walked through Terminal 5 at O'Hare. The transformation was breathtaking. The air of suspicion and arbitrary power was gone, replaced by an atmosphere of quiet professionalism. Digital signs in multiple languages clearly displayed passenger rights. The TSA staff was diverse, courteous, and efficient. The officer checking her ID smiled. "Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice full of genuine respect. "I read about your team's work in Sierra Leone. Thank you." Aerys placed her bags on the conveyor belt, and for the first time in her adult life, she felt no anticipatory clenching in her stomach. She watched as a young woman in a hijab was treated with the same professional courtesy as the elderly white couple in front of her. It was just normal. Gloria Hines, now in a sharp business suit, greeted her on the other side of the checkpoint, holding a tablet. "Dr. Thorne," she said with a proud smile, "our first quarter metrics are in. Passenger complaints are down 92%. Processing times are consistent across all demographic groups, and employee morale is at an all-time high." Marcus joined them, not as the Attorney General, but as her husband, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Ready for your keynote in London?" he asked, handing her a cup. "Always," she smiled, taking his hand. They walked toward their gate, 2 partners who had faced down an ugly injustice and leveraged it to create lasting, systemic change. The goal was never revenge. It was reform. It was about ensuring that security and dignity were no longer opposing forces, but 2 sides of the same coin. This story of justice being served, of a broken system being forced to heal itself, is why Beat Stories exists. We believe in the power of truth to effect change. But it starts with individuals. It started with Gloria Hines' courage to document what she saw. It started with the passengers who refused to look away and chose to hit record. It started with one woman's refusal to be broken. If this story moved you, if it angered you, if it gave you hope, then join our community. Hit that subscribe button and become part of a movement that believes in holding power accountable. Like this video to help our message reach further, and share it with anyone who needs to be reminded that even in the darkest moments, courage is a light that cannot be extinguished. And ask yourself, when you witness an injustice, big or small, what will you do? Comment below. Let's start the conversation that leads to action. This is Beat Stories, where the truth will always find a way.